welcome back to the All Hazards Prepper Show, your go-to spot for all your disaster prep information and how to survive wild SHTF scenarios. Plus, we'll chat about the chaos of the world, throw in weather updates, and cover any topics the All Hazards Prepper has in his head this week. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform and join us on social media. Now, let's welcome your fearless leader and the brains behind the All Hazards Prepper, Blake.
Welcome back to the All Hazards Prepper Show. This is your host, Blake. I hope everyone is staying aware, staying prepared, and staying alive out there. Today, we have a definitely special guest on, William. He is a subject matter expert in forestry and wild and firefighting. Me and William have been talking for the last couple of weeks and found him actually on Reddit of all places. And definitely was super glad to hear that his background and some of the great points he'll be able to bring today on the show. As we've talked about here on the show before and all my other content, wild and fires are definitely a hazard we need to discuss, and that definitely something that everyone needs to prepare for, no matter where you live in the U.S. They could definitely have an effect on you. So William, kind of kicking us off, tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your background and how you got into forestry.
Yeah, so I got into forestry like a lot of people do. Didn't really like much else but being outside. I was a Boy Scout growing up, and like a lot of kids my age, I'm about 30. There's an expectation there to go to college from our parents. So I chose to pursue forestry because I saw they had a fire management program, and I was always kind of a pyromaniac. But once I got there, I found out that I actually really enjoyed the science of it, learning about forestry and natural resources in general and land management. I always found it fascinating. So once I finished that degree, the undergraduate degree, I decided to stick around and get a master's degree, and I studied fire ecology. And both of these degrees are from down in Texas, a little town called Nacogdoches. Stephen F. Austin State University is what it's called, the Lumberjacks. It's a great place, great forestry school, and I learned a ton. And after that, I was looking to find my way on how I would use these fire management, fire ecology, and forestry skills and put them to good use. And I bounced around a bunch, and for a while I traveled across the country as kind of a gypsy type forester, working on national forest lands and even living on them most of the time off the grid. So that was a lot of fun. And now I've kind of settled in California, where I'm working toward trying to solve their wildfire crisis, generally working on public lands because that's a lot of how California is, but we dibble dabble here and there with private projects and other things, but that's how we got here.
Great, definitely. Great story, great background. Everyone, I think, attests that William definitely is someone that is very well respected and well known in this field, and definitely great having you on today to discuss, wildfires and not only the preparedness aspect of it, but today we are going to get into some of the science of it because that's important to understand with these hazards of why they're occurring, why they may be occurring more often. So we're definitely going to have a great conversation on that today. So really, William, kicking us off, and I love to nerd out. I also like science and that type of stuff. And kind of kicking us off here, tell our listeners really, layman's terms, what forestry and wildfire science are and how they're connected and what exactly,
Well, forestry, there's really nothing simple about it. It all gets so complicated because one thing depends on another, and that's kind of the beauty of it, is that there's an art to it. And it's been described as like the art and the science of controlling forests and their quality to meet the needs and values of landowners and society. So where that plays into wildfire science and why they're related is that everything we do either adds fuel or it takes it away, or we convert the land and we change the way water flows. Everything, every action in natural resources is going to have some kind of reaction. And the ability to recognize where we have problems and where we don't, and where we should focus resources, is really where you reach that intersection of like forestry, wildfire science, range management, hydrology, soil science. And you can just go down down the list of all the natural resource sciences, and they're all interconnected, and we don't all talk enough to each other, which is kind of a shame. But that's the crux of how forestry and wildfire are related. They're really one and the same thing in a lot of ways.
Yes, definitely. William, we're talking about beforehand. I spent some time out in Wyoming. I spent a lot of my time dealing with foresters and people that were subject matter experts in that field, because I certainly am not as an emergency manager. And that's the kind of thing, as an emergency manager, you kind of become friends with the people that are subject matter experts in these different hazards and call upon them whenever you need that type of advice. And getting out and learning, and like William said, how connected everything is definitely insane if you don't study this every day or look at it every day like William does, and look at why these things occur. So William, if you kind of want to talk next, why, I think that's just will really drive some of our conversation here, is why are we seeing more wildfires in the US? Are we seeing more wildfires, or is it is what we're seeing pretty common? And is it poor forestry management? Is it environmental factors, droughts, increased temperature, both? Why is it's probably a loaded question, and a question we probably don't have full answers to, but in your expertise, why are we seeing more of this type of hazard occur?
Yeah, it is complicated. It's multifactorial, of course. But here's some statistics since 1990 about wildfires. So about 200 million acres have burned since 1990. The cost of that has been between 15 and 30 trillion dollars, and that's if we include suppression, property, health, and all these other things. Even loss of ecosystem services is incorporated into those numbers. But we've only seen about 1,000 deaths, which is a really good thing and a testament to emergency managers like yourself and some of the guys that are more directly involved in the wildland firefighting aspect than I am, because I'm more on the preventative side of forestry management. And it's really amazing that we haven't lost more people, but with the conditions that we're all facing, it's only a matter of time until we have some kind of mass casualty event where people can't get out. These days, it seems to be mostly elderly folks who wait too long and then can't get out, or people with mobility issues, and that's really unfortunate. But you're not seeing a lot of young, healthy people die in wildfires, except for the big problems with like wildland firefighting, when you have those terrible instances of burnovers and things. So why are we seeing more fires? It's the 100 years of fire suppression. The government and even the private folks were putting out fires left and right every time they started. And all of that started from a fear of fire, because we did have some fires that killed thousands of people. One that's really well known is the Big Burn. I think that was 1910. But one that's not so well known is in a town called Peshtigo, where the fire burned so big, so hot, so horrifyingly large that it killed everybody that lived in the town and everybody who knew them. So our estimates are somewhere around 2,000 people died, but that fire was one that really should be talked about more, because we're setting the stage here for something like that to happen again. So fire suppression played a big role. And then there's reduced active management. A lot less forestry has been done, and there's a few reasons for that, but the main ones are economics. We started getting more lumber from Canada and other sources. Another one is endangered species, like the spotted owl. Came around in 1990, and then that stopped a whole lot of active forestry management in the quest to save the owl, which is unfortunate, because now we're seeing a lot of their habitat burn down in these mega fires. And then after that, we have environmentalist groups who, stand on the shoulders of scientists to proclaim things, and they tend to get in the way of really good forestry projects. And that's not to say that there aren't some forestry projects that should be contested, and scientific ideas should always be fought, and you should never really trust the government with everything. So trust but verify would be a way to put it. But the environmentalists use lawsuits to hold up forestry projects left and right all over the place in the whole country, and that's an issue. And then the third one, and the most controversial reason why we're seeing more fires, is climate change. And while climate change, some people might rear their head about that, and I get it. The rhetoric that was used in the 90s never really came true. I think in 1989, some guy at the UN said that entire nations are going to be wiped off the earth if we don't solve it by 2000, and that never happened. And so unfortunately, because of all this crazy stuff that people said about climate change, a lot of people just don't want to admit that it exists at all. But the totality of the evidence suggests that it absolutely does exist, even if we can't test it using an earth that doesn't have people on it. It's really this interaction of all the evidence that leads me to say that. And regardless of whether or not climate change does or does not exist, we can all admit that we're trending upward in heat and droughts and other things. So the heat and the drought, it's going to affect our forests on top of the issues related to the lack of active management. So you take away the active management, and then you have way too many trees out there, way too high of stocking rates. So these trees are competing against each other for water, for light, nutrients. And because of that, whenever you bring a drought in or excessive heat, all these things, the competition combined with the stress causes them to either outright die from competition related mortality, or the beetles will come in and you'll get these big areas of beetle kill. All right, so yeah, the spotted owls cause some issues, and then we have climate change, which is absolutely an issue. You know, it's not one that people want to talk about a bunch because it's become politicized. I can assure you that the evidence suggests that climate change is in fact real. The question is how real is it? Like, how fast is it going to hit us? And unfortunately, everybody used a bunch of crazy rhetoric in the early 90s to scare people, and none of those predictions ever came true. But if we ignore whether or not climate change is real or not, we can all admit that we're seeing more droughts and more heat. And these things are causing severe stress in our already stressed forests. Because we remove the active management, we have tons of forests who are overstocked. There's way too many trees. They're already competing with each other to the point that they're about to die. And then you get a drought, and then either the beetles come and kill the forest or the forest lights on fire. And usually if the beetles come, the forest is going to light on fire anyways. So we have those issues that are compounding the wildfire crisis. And so there's really that combination of economics, public sentiment, and then the climate change effects that are just driving this whole thing, into the wrong direction. Hopefully we can get a little bit of it under control. We really haven't done a good job the last 20 years.
Absolutely. That's definitely a lot to unpack there, which William talked about, and different factors that are really driving wildfires. There's definitely something William just talked about. You can try to ignore the facts, like William said, and say that some of these factors are not there, but they certainly are if you look at the science and just to look at the last 10 years and look at the damages that have been caused by wildfires and definitely the economic impacts that it could have directly or indirectly on a community. And like William said, it's only going to take a matter of time, and we definitely almost saw that. We can kind of talk about this now, but that kind of gets into my next question about wild and urban interface. But we really saw in LA over the winter that type of wildfire occur, where it was becoming an urban interface where there was fire in urban areas where they're usually if people think about fires, they're thinking about it way out in the woods or out in the public lands or something. And really, LA was a very urban environment. And William, you were out in California at that time. Do you have any talks about what happened there and why we saw what we saw in Los Angeles? Yes, great point there, William. Talking about what's driving wildfires and these factors, and that urban interface that we're really my next question. And talking, I think a great example of wildfires coming into urban areas is what happened in LA in December. When you're out in California, can you talk about what you saw? Maybe you were on the ground or know someone that was, and why are we seeing especially wildfires move into these urban environments that are definitely cause a bigger headache for emergency responders, emergency managers in terms of evacuations, but also a severe economic impacts as well?
Yeah, so I'm a Northern California guy, so I wasn't down in Los Angeles when it all happened, but that was a primarily wind-driven fire. It's really high winds blowing fire all over the place, and it's compounded by the fact that they had so much vegetation near their houses. And you're supposed to clear out around your house. It's actually a big thing in California, but more so, in my opinion, the public lands officials there should have done more to do fuels management treatments. And you'll hear arguments against this in that ecosystem in particular. And to explain it quickly, the chaparral shrubs, that ecosystem down there, it used to burn, and it burned just like this. It would explode, and then 20 years later, it would explode again. And so if you do too much mechanical thinning and prescribed burns and all these things, you start to lose a little bit of ecosystem diversity. And in my view, they might have placed like the need for ecosystem diversity over the need for public safety down there, because they really should be staggering big fire lines around these communities in the wildland urban interface. I mean, they just let brush grow right up to the edge of them. And whether or not that would have helped, we can debate it. I know the fire scientists do, But in general, I would think most people would agree with me that if we can lower the fire intensities by reducing fuel on the edge of the WUI, that's the place we should do it. If we reduce the fuel, even in high wind situations, we're probably going to have a lot less fire brands flowing into people's houses, landing on the roofs, lighting things on fire, and all the other issues. But the reality is they just didn't do much of anything. You know, it was kind of bound to happen, and it's probably going to happen again somewhere else down there in those type of communities because those fires burn so intensely. But you know, it was really hard for people to get out of that one too because of those windy roads that were going up in there, and the fire moved so quickly. So it's certainly hazardous, and it's something to think about if you live in one of those communities. Is what are you totally surrounded by fuel, and how are you going to get out of there if it lights on fire?
Absolutely. And fuel is what it not only drives these fires, but it's really also the meteorology parts of it. Is the wind and those factors and those Santa Ana winds that were driving that LA around that area and that time. It really was what was driving those factors. And like we were just talking about before, all fires, there's so many different little aspects to it that all make it into one that cause the hazard to be real and cause it to be devastating, unfortunately. And yeah, a lot of people don't have a plan. They don't think about they live in these forests surrounded by fuel, and unfortunately, most of these places like that are cabins and secondary homes, but also some primary homes. And they think everything's okay, and they don't have an evacuation route. They don't know how to get out. They don't have multiple ways to get out. Most of the time, these places are just one way in, one way out type of thing. Let alone trying to get a fire truck back to them is next to impossible. In my time in Wyoming, we had quite a bit of public lands. We had a large FMAG fire that occurred. Whenever I first showed up on my first day, it was 200,000 acres of mostly public lands on fire, and trying to wrap my head around that being from North Carolina was hard. But a lot of people don't think about it until it happens. They don't think about how to get out. Luckily, in that fire, we didn't see any deaths or injuries, but certainly saw some economic loss. But I think definitely it's good if you live in an area, a forest, a grasslands, or even on a farm and you have, a grass and, things like that around. If you're not in the middle of a city surrounded by asphalt, you definitely have the hazard of wildfire there. It is present and you need to prepare for it. So, great points there, William, and kind of leads us into our next question, which is, really talking about if landowners and if you own, a large amount of land or grassland or acreage, whatever you want to call it, what are some good practices for landowners that they can practice good forestry management and really mitigate some of the factors that we've been talking about?
Yeah, your best option is going to be to hire a forest manager or a rangeland specialist. You know, there's plenty of consulting companies out there that will do right by you and try to meet whatever goals you want to meet. It's really complicated to just go out there and start cutting trees down and because there's so many things to think about. You know, there's the wildlife, there's the water quality, there's innumerable things that you could go out and maybe not really make that big of a difference, but you could cause some harm too. So I would suggest certainly getting in contact with either your neighbors or your local government, and they can point you in the right direction of local companies who are going to know the most in that region, right? Like as a guy, I've worked all across the United States, at least the Western United States. And even still, a very specific question somewhere in, like northern Mississippi, that's going to be a tough one for me to answer with any form of confidence because it's really just so localized. Some general rules, is don't keep big dead wood near your house. Those kind of things. The rules around here in California are probably good rules to follow. In the immediate vicinity around your house, that 0 to 5 feet, just try to clear everything that could light on fire. And then about 5 to 30 feet from your house, you're going to remove all the dead vegetation, short grass, keep the tree limbs away from your house or anything else that might be combustible, prune the lower tree limbs. And then after that, going out to about 100 feet, you want to keep trees spaced out. You don't want their crowns all interlocked. You don't want any type of ladder fuel going up into those crowns. And these kind of things will give the firefighters, after you eventually evacuate, or even if you decide to stay and defend, it'll give you a better chance at saving your home and all of your belongings.
Yes, that's and it's called Being Firewise. I guess that's the program that the U.S. Forestry Service pushes out. Is that, or I think it's a state program? That's what I hear all the time as a emergency manager. That's what I've pushed out. Is that what it's called? I guess.
Yep, Firewise,
Yeah.
California Defensible Space. There's a few different names for it, but that's the general rule: is try to give yourself a chance, or the firefighters.
Yep. Exactly. That was something as an emergency manager when I was out west doing that I did, and I connected these people with foresters, with the state forester that was local, and push out this public information that hey, this is what we need to do to keep your house safe. But kind of going back to people that own large amount of land, it's definitely localized, like William said. Woods look a whole lot different from here in North Carolina than Northern California, I'm sure. And around here, we're dealing with a lot of sandy soil and definitely pine trees and things of that, where in California, dealing with a whole different type of ecology. So definitely, if you own a large amount of land, I think it's definitely behooves you to be a good steward of the land and hire a forester, hire someone that goes out. William, is there, maybe speaking wrong here, but is there, if you own, a large amount of acreage that is woods, is there tax write-offs for that or something? I've heard about that before, or maybe how you, however you classify your land, and then you're able to make money off of it, but doing forestry.
Yeah, there's a few different options. There's normally like forest programs where you're growing timber and they'll tax you on, let's say, the value of the timber that grows every year, or you can put it in a wildlife management program. All these things are very, very state specific, and not all states offer them, but generally they do because we've had such a lack of forestry. There's wildland forest plans, and then there's also cost sharing programs through the NRCS and other people at the USDA that you can look into for, if you don't have that much money to spend on forestry, they might be able to help you out. And that's where I would look, is your local government, to see what kind of options you have. But you certainly don't want to have a bunch of forest land sitting there, costing you tons in taxes.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's definitely something, if you own a large amount of land, to look into. It definitely would be better than just letting it sit there and have the risk of creating on, more wildfires. Kind of talking about people that live in these urban environments like Los Angeles, places where there are large amounts of forest around smaller towns, or even larger towns like Los Angeles. What are some ways that people just there can prevent wildfires from happening? We talked about it, the home wise, but what are some other ways, I guess, that people can really prevent these wildfires from happening?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, don't start any of them. Be very safe with fire, especially in the summertime if it's fire season where you're at. And then also, look at your power lines. See if there's any issues that need to be brought up to the local power company, because in general, the power companies are way behind with what they should be doing, and they've got a lot of ground to cover. So the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and if there's a big dead tree near a power line, on the road into town or whatever, you should tell them about that and raise a little bit of noise, because these kind of things, they can save lives, save property. I would just really be on the lookout for where the biggest hazardous spots are, and see if there's a reason why nobody's addressed it yet, and be that voice in your local government.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. That's definitely a good term there. In terms of people building houses in forest, in areas that might be more prone to wildfires, what are some good, I've seen some good things out there, especially lately. Is there good things, ways to build a house, better roofing, things like that? If you're in a more wildfire area, to mitigate that concern.
Yeah, they do have those roofs that are supposed to be a lot more heat resistant, and I think that's kind of where the majority of California is beginning to shift, is dealing with that. It kind of depends too on what the general like wind direction is in your state. Like in California, fires a lot of times will burn with the wind, so they'll burn like northeast, and so you could think about that in your plans. If you've just got a big parcel and you're looking at where to put it, you can assess the fire danger on that parcel and then put your house somewhere where you think it might be better defended. These are things too that really should be discussed with a forester who can look at that property and see where he thinks the biggest fire risk is, because it's not always all that clear, and it's going to depend on your adjacent landowners as well, and all these other factors. So it's definitely something to think about whenever you're going to go build a home out in the wilderness. Is, how am I putting this in the right place? And we see this with even people building in floodplains and other things like that. So definitely something to be aware of.
Yes, that's why I've kind of brought it up, is, as an emergency manager, that's kind of what emergency managers are looking at now. It used to be, a reaction response. And now we're really looking at ways that we can prevent things from happening, like floods and fires and things of that nature, and prevent economic or even home loss or even worse, loss of life. And those are great things to put in place. Yes, they're more expensive, and that's what a lot of people really don't like about mitigation is it's usually more expensive to do it up front. But I promise you, it's probably definitely or it is less expensive in the long run. I think the going saying in FEMA has probably gone up a little bit since how that works, but $1 of preparedness leads to $5 of less damage after one of these wildfires or any really natural disaster that could occur. It's a great point there, William. Kind of talking about personal preparedness. A lot of my listeners are beginner preppers, beginning people that may have been through a wildfire and go, "Hey, I need to get prepared." And then they start listening to my podcast for whatever reason. So talking about that, what are some good ways that people can practice good preparedness for wildfires, no matter where they're living? And what are some ways that we can resources that they can obtain to prepare themselves for this?
Yeah, I mean, you should know multiple routes of escape from your house, and you should know these and be able to drive them without any type of GPS or really any map. I mean, you should have it in your head about where you're going to go, where you're going to take your family. You should practice that route, at least drive it a few times if it's not a route you normally take. Consider like where these routes go through the terrain and the vegetation, because the last thing you want to do is go right into a problem. And that kind of rolls into knowing which way the fire might actually be heading. And in California and a lot of other places, we've got really good emergency managers who will put out like risk areas and evacuation zones and things, but not everywhere has that. And in really fast, rapidly evolving situations, you might not get that. So something to consider there. With that, pay attention to all the local alerts, any other alerts you can get your hands on in those kind of moments. I've dealt with it before. I've been evacuated. Just really pay attention to that and listen to them because they're gonna know, especially in the later hours of it, they're gonna know a lot more than you do about where the risk really is here. And then if you've got elderly neighbors or elderly friends or children, these are the kind of people who can't get out, and they're the ones who need your help. Really pay attention to them and make sure that they're taken care of, because it's always a tragedy whenever those folks don't get out. And then keep your truck full, at least a half a tank, just to get out of there. And make sure you keep a bag. I know I do, with all of my important documents, everything that all the things that would really be horrible to lose. Make sure you keep a bag with those, or at least a bag with other things like water, food, flashlights, all of that nearby to those documents if they're in a safe or something. And that way you can just grab and go in a matter of minutes. And I think if you cover all those bases, you put yourself in a better position than most people.
Absolutely. Great points there. Kind of going back to evacuation, as that is really something that is driven, that's, discussed a lot whenever we're talking about wildfires. Whenever I was out west dealing with wildfires as an emergency manager, I had people call like, should I evacuate? And you have to ask, if it's not mandatory, if it's not voluntary, and if they're asking the question of should I evacuate, it's really up to them. And it's hard. They want someone to tell a definite answer, and it's kind of hard. I know there's different states that are doing different types of programs. I know that there's I don't know if California does this, but I think it's the green, yellow, red, like a stoplight type thing. If it's red, that's when you need to evacuate. If it's yellow, it's like a voluntary, and green, it's the wildfire is occurring, but it doesn't have any threat to human life or property or anything like that. Is it something that California's done, or maybe that's just a Wyoming, Colorado thing?
Not necessarily. A lot of people these days are getting their fire information through like social media and different apps. I'm blanking right now on the name of it, but let me see.
I used to use NC Web. Is that what it is?
No, but they're powered by it. It's
Yeah.
let me see.
For anyone that wants to know, NC Web is if you want to track wildfires, if you like what we're talking about, type in NC Web. It will show you literally every little wildfire that is burning in the U.S. Out west, I was part of making sure that our fires information was kept up to date on NC Webs. Definitely a good tool to have.
I got it now.
You're interested in
It's called Watch Duty, and Watch Duty.
Okay, yeah.
is a really well done app that I know I use it. All of my forestry colleagues use it. It's just really well done. It'll get you all the information you need, and the program's just great. That's really been a good solution here in California to help people out.
I've heard of that as well. So definitely a good resource as well if you're living in a wildfire prone area to hit up and to have. William, talking about the after effects of wildfires. I don't think a lot of people talk about this. I know, it's definitely something that needs to be talked about because there's a lot of things that can happen after the wildfire occurs. And can you kind of talk about that with flooding and the flood after fire type of thing, and what hazards are more prone after you see major ecology economic loss in these areas?
Yeah, I mean, the devastation afterwards can't really be understated. If we start with people, we've got the loss of lives, the loss of towns, people's roads get destroyed from either the fire or the fire trucks or the dozers, and it takes forever to fix those. And, I spend a lot of time trying to do fire remediation work, and you see these communities that have just been gutted, and it's a tragedy. If we want to talk about the ecology side of things, these fires are what we call stand replacing. So there is no more forest there. Now it's just a moonscape initially, and you get whatever comes back. There's not enough trees nearby in a lot of these spots to reseed it naturally, and so you rely on the birds who spread invasive species sometimes, or you get these shrubs that the birds are spreading. 5, 10, 15 years after, a lot of these, a lot of these fire scars don't ever really look like they're supposed to. And the cost to remediate them is so high that it's really not done near as much as it should be. Yeah, it's prevalent. You see them, and it just kind of it scars the landscape in a way that's unknown. Nothing about that's naturally. That never used to happen. There are some plant communities where it happens, like the down in the brush near Los Angeles and the chaparral, or up in the mountains in the lodgepole pines. Those plants evolved with that exploding type fire that just replaces everything, and those plants come back really quick. But we're not seeing that same kind of fire that used to be around in these other places. So that's a tragedy. The loss of wildlife habitat. The deer in California, the population's been halved since 1990. So, it went from like 1 million to 500,000 deer. And, the wildfires don't help. It's not really the main reason, but it's interrelated. Like I said, right off the bat, everything's related in some kind of way. And then if we talk about, some of the hazards, it's definitely going to be falling trees. Like initially after a wildfire, there's still stumps burning, and there's still roots burning and rotting roots. And so you really need to watch out for that. I'm always scared when I'm in those fields of snags because they kill foresters and wildland firefighters all the time. And then we have the issues of like erosion and like mass soil changes that are going to cause like landslides after rain. That's a really common one you see in the news whenever it blocks a road, at least. But I assure you they're happening all throughout the woods. The ones that don't block the roads don't really get much attention, but they're happening all over, and severe soil disruption causing areas to be changed for very long periods of time too. So it's the aftermath of these fires is something that doesn't get talked about enough, but it's something that I'm hoping the state, local, and federal governments, as well as our communities, can come together to try and restore some of our forests, because they provide so many things to us, from beauty to wildlife to clean water and clean air and recreation, everything. What's more important than saving these things that are right in your backyard?
Absolutely. Yes, great points there. All are hazards after wildfires, and I just don't think that's talked about a whole lot. Look at LA for example. We haven't seen any stories unless you're local or anything, that the aftermath of this fire. You might see the a day or two after the fire is out, but what's the long term impacts to ecology, to economic, to life in general? The flood after fire is definitely a concern. And talking about my time out west, and FEMA didn't give us a whole lot of money because it was secondary homes, and they just give us money to plant grass seed eventually, essentially, and that way we can kind of get some root back to the forest, and some so that we're not having erosion and flooding or whatever. But definitely, as I don't know if you want to talk, about, or if you know a whole lot about, recovery with FEMA. How does that work after a wildland fire occurs, especially a large, devastating one?
I mean, from what I've heard, I'm not an emergency manager. I'm not a like direct wildland firefighter or involved in that aspect of it. But I speak to the landowners whenever I come by, 5, 10 years later, trying to figure out how to fix this. And most of them don't have a very good opinion of anybody in the government. They seem to have a good thing about the firefighters, but anybody above the firefighter level doesn't get a great rap from those folks. And who can blame them? You see how nobody's fixed anything, and they put out the fire, and maybe they saved their house, maybe not. And it's really sad to see. So I don't know how much FEMA really does. I don't know how much a big federal organization can target so locally, and with how complex reforestation is. I mean, God, we could have a whole podcast about that. It's really hard for them. So really, I'm hoping there's some type of like distributed fund to the states who can give it to people who are in these regions who really need help, because it's just not happening, and the feds jump from one fire to the other. They never have enough people, and it's like, it's multifactorial problem, and unfortunately, it's our fellow Americans who live in these rural communities who just get beat down over and over again throughout the last 50 years that are facing this problem head on.
A great point there, and that's exactly what I saw when I was out west for my short little time there. And the federal government is unfortunately not there to save anyone after the recovery, and they just kind of leave it up to the locals to deal with, the local emergency manager, and they give you this long term project that you got to complete, and to get just some money that just really goes towards what I said, grass seed. And that's really up to, the landowner to spread, or you may get some money. We did able to get some money to have, private forestry companies like yourself go in and cut those snags and make the woods look a little bit better, but that it's still damaged. It's still there. And it's definitely something that in the U.S. we need to think about and talk about, is that recovery after wildfire, because it is certainly devastating, just like any natural disaster would be. So, William, this has definitely been a great conversation. I have thoroughly enjoyed talking with you. I definitely like geeking out. William, is there anything you want to tell our listeners, kind of wrapping up? If it's more of a preparedness thing, or just something that you think about?
It's not so much related to fire, but more of just the forest industry, the natural resources community. We need more people, young people, old people, everyone. If you found some of the things that I said is interesting and you want to learn more, and I can promise you there's so much more to learn about nature. Forestry is a great place to be, and I implore you and your family and your sons, your daughters to learn more about your natural resources near you, and spend more time in the woods, because it's some of the great foresters back in the day said it's where you talk to God, and I seem to agree with that in a lot of ways. It's really special. So I hope I could bring some of that passion for it to you.
We didn't even talk about, just a little bit about your company, and where people can go and find you if they are looking for some forestry advice.
Yeah, so I work in California for a private company who I really love. They're great people, but I also own my own company back in Texas called Athena Resource Group. You can find us at athenaresourcegroup.com. And then you can find me on social media as Woodsy Will. And, you can reach out to me if you have any specific questions about your area, or if you just want to learn more. I really nerd out on this stuff, as you said, and I really enjoy it. So any kind of question you got, I can either give you the right answer, or I can point you in the direction of one of my colleagues who can.
That's great, William. I am super grateful that you agreed to be on. We will try to have him on again after we have a large incident like a wildfire occur, get you back on and discuss, what your take of it, kind of after action it, and ways that people can learn from it as well. So grateful that you came on today. Everyone, make sure you go follow William on all his social media channels, and I hope everyone got something out of this. Even if you don't live in a wildfire area, it's definitely an important hazard that we need to discuss. We need to talk about more, and prepare for, because it is certainly devastating on the ecological loss, and then the economic loss, let alone the human loss that we see often from wildfires as well. Hope everyone continues to stay aware, stay prepared, and stay alive out there. The All Hazards Prepper out. Man, it was great talking with William, and talking about wildfires and forestry, and that hazard that is out there and definitely prevalent in today's society in the U.S. and really around the world. We're seeing the hazard of wildfires break out. So hope everyone enjoyed that show with William. Definitely go check him out on social media, wherever I tag him at. He is on Facebook, Instagram, and X. So go tag him on, go check him out on there. Just to let everyone know, this will be the ending of season 2 for the All Hazards Prepper. But don't you worry, we will be back with season 3 in just a few weeks. I have even more guests lined up. I have some great, exciting guests lined up. But I'm going to take a little bit of a break, a few weeks, to figure out some audio things and some recording things as well. If you've noticed, sometimes my audio is not the best, and I'm trying to work through some of those technological issues. It's a hazard, of course. So anyway, if you have not done so, go and get your own household emergency operations plan. As you know, we launched this initiative just a few weeks ago with the All Hazards Emergency Management Group, LLC, which I founded this year. And with that, we are selling the Household Emergency Operations Plan for $3.99. $3.99, that's all it is. One-time purchase. You fill it out. Very simple to fill out, PDF fillable, or you can use on Word. And then, of course, if you want me to fill it out, that service is offered as well. So make sure you go check that out. We will be back with you in a few weeks. I have a great guest lined up. It will actually be our first international guest. So yes, the All Hazards Preppers reached that level. We are going to be talking about CBRN, chemical, biological, radioactive, nuclear events, and how to protect yourself from them. So I have subject matter expert from overseas in Europe that will be on the show to discuss. We're having to work out timing here because he's on a whole different time zone than we are here in the U.S. So anyway, hope everyone enjoyed season 2. Make sure to go follow us, go like us, go share our pages, and make sure that you continue to stay aware, stay prepared, and stay alive. The All Hazards Prepper out.